Okay, great. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming. This is great. My name is Steve Gant. I'm the, I'll introduce Ryan in just a moment. I'm the chair of the MBTA Communities Working Group. And so this is our final outreach session that we have scheduled for the outreach to the community on the MBTA Communities Act and Duxbury's obligation to comply with that act. So we'll give you a presentation that we've given in other forums before, and then we certainly welcome all your questions and your input afterwards, because that's where the best participation happens. So, Brian, if you want to start, and then
thank you, Steve.
You can take it. I'll put it
sure.
Okay. Right where the answer.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Brian Glennon. I'm a member of the MBTA Communities Working Group along with Steve. I'm also chair of the Select Board. Thank you all for being here. With this, as Steve mentioned, this is our third program. We've had 2 evenings. This is the afternoon. Try to catch anybody who can't be here in the evening. So thank you for coming. I'll just talk about some of the things we're going to go over today. First is, what is the MBTA Communities Act? Clipper certainly has done a great job covering what it is and how we got here, but we'll just touch upon that here as well as a group. We'll briefly discuss what the MBTA Communities Working Group is. There's a group of 6 of us who've been working on this for a while. We'll talk about feedback we received from town meeting back in November. I know there's some questions about, hey, we voted no, so why are we still talking about this? We'll get to that as well. We'll talk about the working group's proposal to town meeting as to how we think we can comply with the act while being as minimally invasive on the town as possible. And then, as I said, we'll talk about the proposed compliance strategy and opportunities for public outreach. Steve, I think this is the last one.
This is it. Here we are.
Yeah, excellent. So next, what is the MBTA Communities Act? So this actually dates back a number of years to 2021. It requires basically all the communities in eastern Massachusetts, with the exception of the Cape and Islands and a couple of towns in southern Bristol County, to comply with housing obligations. So the MBTA Communities Act started as an opportunity for the Commonwealth, the state, to address housing shortages in eastern Massachusetts. So as part of that whole proposal back in 2021, the MBTA Communities Act was passed. And despite its name, it's not really specific to the MBTA. It really has nothing to do with the MBTA as an organization. It has to do mainly with the service area of the MBTA. So under the statute that was passed, there are 177 communities that are listed within the law itself, saying if you're on this list, you're considered to be an MBTA community. Duxbury is on the list, so we are that's how we get on the list. The legislature put us there. What does it do? So the state, as much as we feel this is still a one-size-fits-all approach, and we'll talk about the litigation in a little bit about what Duxbury is doing on a parallel track to challenge our obligation, it allows the towns that are subject to the MBTA Communities Act to choose areas within their communities as to where a district would go. So what is this at a high level? It's a zoning exercise. Zoning is basically a set of rules within a community as what you can do, where you can do it. Or stated another way, what you can't do and where you can't do it. So this is a type of zoning bylaw that would allow denser housing in certain areas of town. There's Governor Baker signing it in 2021. I know there's been a lot of discussion about Governor Healy enforcing it, but this has been a bipartisan law because it was passed under a Republican governor and instituted by a Democratic governor. All right. So we have an MBTA Communities Working Group that was constituted by the Select Board a while back, on what I'll call round 1.0, back in to deal with November, the MBTA Communities Act proposal we put together there. It's a 7-member board. 1 member has recently resigned, but in addition to Steve and me, there are 4 other community members who've been involved in putting together both the map and the bylaw that we'll talk about in a little bit. We meet every Thursday. I'll be looking forward to special town meeting because then our Thursday meetings will go away, I think, for a while. We'll get back to see our families again. So what is the act and how does it apply specifically to Duxbury? Because I'm sure as you've read, there's different requirements for different towns and cities. So for example, communities that are along the red line have more dense requirements than towns like Duxbury, who don't even have a station anywhere in our town. We're adjacent to Kingston. which does have a commuter rail stop. So for Duxbury, the law says that we have to set aside or identify 50 acres, and we'll get into the details of where those are and how we came up with that, at least 50 acres where this zoning could apply. We're required to pass this zoning bylaw. Now, interestingly, even though it's a state law that says, hey, town of Duxbury, you must do this, the process for adopting the law is the same way that we adopt zoning bylaws generally, which is a town meeting, or in this case, special town meeting. So we have to go back to special town meeting. That's why we're calling you all out in what hopefully will be a rainy day, so we're not ruining anybody's beginning of summer. But that's why we're doing it as a special town meeting. The state has said, well, since you didn't do it back in November, we're going to have a do-over, and we'll get into why that is. The do-over has to be done by July. So we set up a special town meeting in June. Gives us about a month or so before the actual due date, so we can tweak things if need be for technical reasons. And then, most importantly, and I know there's been some confusion on this point, as I mentioned earlier, this is a zoning exercise. So the town of Duxbury is not required to build anything, not required to finance anything, not required to permit anything, not required to do anything except for town meeting to legalize certain areas in town to say, if those private property owners or a developer want to build something in the future subject to this, this bylaw amendment, they can. So in other words, this is an administrative process by the town to zone certain areas within the town, and that's the end of it. It doesn't require us to actually do anything after that. Whoops. There we go, wrong button. All right, after this one, Steve, I'm going to pass it over to you, because this is an important point as well. Back in November, we had a special town meeting for this purpose. We're looking at a zoning district, or in that case, two districts, sub-districts, where we said, we think, as the MBTA Communities Working Group, we think this is an opportunity to do two things. One is to comply with the law, which requires dense development, or zoning for dense development, but also we have studies from years past in the town, not the least of which is the comprehensive plan that identifies goals that the town needs to achieve or should seek to achieve over time. One of those is to create more housing or housing diversity. So instead of single-family houses on 1 acre lots, our comprehensive plan, which was put together through the input of many, many citizens in town, was finished in 2019. We need things by way of townhouses or condos or apartments. Not to say they should be everywhere in town, but the comprehensive plan says, as we look to the future in the town, we need to consider housing options, particularly for folks who have lived here for a generation and put their kids through school, and now they don't want the big house anymore. They want to stay in town, but they have no place to go because there aren't a lot of options. So the working group last fall said, well, maybe we can achieve two goals here. One is to comply with the MBTA Communities Act, but the second is maybe we can put to use some of the studies we had in the past saying this is an opportunity maybe for additional housing. So we kind of split the difference here, and we took one site, the Island Creek site, and said, well, that's already densely developed. Let's put a bunch of units there, which won't be built because they're already there. And let's also look at a property that's been talked about for development for a long time, and at some point probably will be developed. That's the Bonji site. So there's nothing there except a turkey farm right now. And our thought was, well, if we're going to have to do this anyway, maybe we can kill two birds with one stone. Potentially get some development that the comprehensive plan says we should be looking at, and go from there. Well, we went to town meeting, and certainly was a resounding no. In fact, it was a 9-to-1 ratio, where folks in the town said, absolutely not, we don't want this sort of density anywhere in Duxbury. All right, that's fine. The other piece that I want to point out that's changed, because there's still folks saying, well, why are we doing this again? We already said no. Very important point, very valid point. The Supreme Judicial Court, that's the highest court in Massachusetts, in December, heard a case from the town of Milton, which challenged this law and said, hey, we don't think this law is constitutional, it shouldn't apply anywhere in the state. The state's highest court said, well, actually, it is a valid law. There were some technical issues with the regulations that went under the law, but said, no, towns have to comply, but you, state agency that's administering this thing, you need to go back and rewrite your rules. So what we learned in December, which was after town meeting, is that we don't have the option of saying no. We thought we did back in the fall. In fact, what we understood the situation to be is if we said no, the worst that can happen is we would lose 4 specific grants. All right? The town said no. The Supreme Court ruled the following month that actually no is not an answer. And also what's happened since then is the state Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, that's the organization that's administering this law, said, you know what, it's not just going to be 4 grants you're going to lose if you vote no. It's actually going to be about 17 now, and Steve will get into that soon. And of course, that caught the town's attention because we rely on grants. And as you know, we didn't pass an override at annual town meeting, which is fine. There were certainly reasons, both pro and con. But the reason I raise that is because it makes fiscal issues even more important now. And with the state saying, well, you've had these grants in the past, you're not going to have these grants in the future if you vote no, our group, the MBTA Communities Working Group, is trying to thread the needle where we comply with the letter of the law, thereby allowing us to maintain our eligibility for all those grants, but also do so in a way where it's unlikely, not impossible, but unlikely that new dense development will be built anywhere in the town. So that's what Steve will get into as we talk about the maps and the bylaw itself. I know I've thrown a lot at you. Before I pass off to Steve, can I answer any questions? Yes, sir.
Couple questions. One, the lawsuit with Milton, yes, that was, didn't go Milton's way, but it didn't go full state way. The new lawsuit with the unfunded mandate,
Yes.
it sounds like this group is 4 or more houses. Is that what, I mean, you're saying minimal, but are you against this or 4 or more houses?
That's an excellent question. Will you answer that one before you get to the next one? Which is, we are agnostic as to which way town meeting should go. Here's the issue. Typically with a warrant article, there's a proponent. Somebody is bringing it forth because we think it's a good idea. In this case, this was something the state pushed down and said, Duxbury, you need to deal with this. You need to comply with it. There's really no proponent. So the select board put together the MBTA Communities Working Group to say, hey, figure this out and make something or propose something that the town can consider at town meeting for compliance with the law if that's where we need to go. But to your point on the litigation, we do have pending litigation, the town itself and other towns as well. Even though the law we know is valid from the case back in December, we're attacking it on a couple of grounds. One is that this is an unfunded mandate, meaning that the state auditor, as I'm sure everybody has read, has ruled or issued an opinion that this law is an unfunded mandate as applied to the communities. And the reason for that, or the import of that ruling, is to allow us as a town to then say, armed with that finding from the state auditor, we can ask a judge, say, hey, if you agree with what the state auditor just ruled, please exempt us from having to comply with this at all. That's the argument for the state auditor with the unfunded mandate. We're also attacking the obligation on another ground, which is as applied to Duxbury, it's unlawful. And there's a lot of legal points that goes into that's beyond what we're talking about today. But we're coming at it from a couple of different perspectives. But I also want to be mindful of the fact that we're also pursuing these issues on parallel tracks. So exactly to your point, is this group sort of cheering with pom-pom saying this is something town meeting absolutely should do? No, we're simply providing the facts as we interpret them and the best we can do in terms of saying, all right, this is kind of a bag of lemons, and we make some lemonade with this. And the most important part, at least from my perspective as a member of the select board, is what can we as a town do to preserve the grants that we rely upon from the state, of which, as I said, there's about 17. So, my answer to your short question, are we advocating? No. We're suggesting that if we have to adopt it, which at this point we do, unless something changes with the court, we think this is an appropriate solution that gets us to comply, check mark, with the state, but has a likely minimal impact on future development. You had another question?
Well, yeah, to that, the second one, is one, we all know if we do zone it, it will be built. If you can find a dollar there, it will be done. And there is a dollar there. Somebody can make money off of knocking down freshly built, put things, put more in. But more importantly, if we pass it before the lawsuit is finished, we lose our ability to rezone. I mean, once you zone it, you pull a permit, they have 5 years to build.
Right.
You can't, they're grandfathered. So it would almost be detrimental for us to do. Because basically, if we do this, anybody has that property will pull a permit. If I own that property, I would pull a permit the day we pass. And then, once that happens, even if it's an unfunded mandate, we can't pull that back.
Thank you for raising that, because that's a really important point as well, because as I said, we have these two parallel tracks. Well, one of the trains is going to get there first. So is it a ruling from the court, or is it town meeting? Which one is it going to be? So in your hypothetical, if we don't have a ruling from the court, in other words, we don't have any injunctive relief, in other words, the court hasn't said you don't have to comply, so the default is we do have to comply. If we go forward and we vote to adopt, you're absolutely correct, there are vested rights at that point. What we have proposed, we as the MBTA Communities Working Group, is that in the event the town still feels strongly that we want to challenge this, then we'll continue with the lawsuit, and if we ultimately win, at that point, we can then go back to either special or annual town meeting and revoke the law the same way we passed it. But you're right, there is a period of time, as long as permits are pulled, there is a period of time. Yes, you're right.
Well, we all know that permits we pulled, and we've seen it in other towns. And the other issue on that is, how much will it cost us if they do build, which they will, against the grants that we're going to lose? I mean, like our school system can't handle that many units.
I hear, we've done some looking into that, and that's one of the big questions with the unfunded mandate, is saying, well, the state hasn't even undertaken this analysis to see what it's going to cost towns in the event this full build-out. And we'll get to the issue of whether full build-out is even possible. But the issue is, what are the costs going to be? Very valid points. And we're trying to address those the best we can with the information we have, but a lot of this is just unknowable because we just don't know what can be built, when it can be built, how it can be built. So we're using best guesses on what's likely to happen or not, as the case may be. Did I answer your question? Or
You did.
Try to anyway?
We do understand, if we pass it, it will be built. I mean, is there anybody that thinks that won't happen?
That's a guess. Maybe, maybe not. What I do know, for the only certainty I can offer, is if we don't pass it, we lose access to the grants.
Was there any other options out there that would be, like, if we did have to do a paper, is there any other options that we saw that would make sure it would be built?
Great point. And Steve will get into this in terms of how we selected the districts that we're looking at. The short answer is yes, we looked at other locations to see what can we do to make them selected the most dense areas in town. And as you'll hear from Steve, that's exactly what we did. We don't have a lot of dense development, so we kind of had slim pickings in terms of what we could look at.
I mean, not to be facetious, but like, what about the Duxbury outlet? We know that that will never be developed. We know there's land there. We know that that's wholly to the town. And what if we could rezone that? We know that there's no way. Have we looked at that?
At this point, I'm going to pass it over. You're walking into some of Steve's presentation, so I think, Steve?
Yep, sure, great.
Thank you for the good questions.
Yep. We'll touch on that in just a second. So Brian was touching on the legalities of the Act. So in January of 25, that's when the SJC ruled in the Milton case. The Act is constitutional, and the Attorney General has the authority to enforce it. That means that we have an obligation to comply with it. As Brian mentioned, we're still seeking an exemption from compliance in the lawsuit, having to do with the unfunded mandate, as well as under the validity of it applying to the town of Duxbury. We don't have any ruling on that yet, but we're awaiting that. We're hoping that something may happen before town meeting, a special town meeting, but there's no guarantee that will happen. So we don't know what will happen, but if it succeeds on the unfunded mandate question, then the issue becomes, well, the state would be able to resolve that by funding the mandate. However, or if the court decides that the court decides that would be sufficient. So that's one area, one direction that could go. The benefits of complying with the MBTA communities law, as Brian mentioned, there are 17 state grant programs that we would be ineligible for. This would be for areas like protecting areas from storms and flooding, upgrading infrastructure like our sidewalk project on Washington Street. Just looking historically, back in 23 and 24, we received over $2 million in grants that we would be ineligible for. And right now we have under application about $1 to $2 million in grants that we would be ineligible for. So there's a lot of exposure here, particularly considering how stressed fiscally our town is after the override failed earlier this year. The other key benefit, and this is something that we really do want to emphasize. If we do pass this, we maintain control over our zoning. We'll avoid additional costs to achieve compliance for town meeting, additional legal costs through court actions, consultants that we've had to engage, other costs like that. We will avoid those costs. And if we don't choose our own zoning locations, if we don't pass something ourselves, the possibility is the state could do this for us. That's a possibility. Given that it's enforceable, the Attorney General could file suit against the town and to compel us to comply with the law. And if we continue to refuse, there's a possibility, certainly not a guarantee, there's a possibility that the state could appoint someone to come in and designate areas in town. Certainly don't have to be the ones that we've chosen for this purpose. Could choose areas in town and write a bylaw that would be compliant and then force us to adopt that. I don't want that. I don't think anyone else wants that. We want to maintain control to the greatest extent that we can. And this plan is something that would allow us to do that. So here we look at the proposed map. So there are two, as Brian mentioned, there are two sub-districts that we're looking at right now. The first is the MCOD. So MCOD, what does that mean? That's the Multifamily Communities Overlay District. So MCOD is Multifamily Communities Overlay District, Kingstown. And then we have the MCOD Tremont. So this right here in Kingstown, this is Route 53 or Kingstown Way right here. In this location, this is the village of Duxbury right here. So that's the MCOD Kingstown. And then the MCOD Tremont, so this is Route 3A or Tremont Street right here, right near the intersection with Route 3. So this is where the Island Creek development is. So these are the two sub-districts that we've chosen for this purpose to comply with the law. And that's where they're located. Brian touched on this earlier. Each of these locations right now has existing dense development on them. So the message that we heard again from town meeting last fall was we want to minimize the possibility that there's going to be new development. And if there is any new development, that it be as small or limited as possible. These are the two sites that allow us to do that to the greatest extent possible. And then here's the districts themselves, or the sub-districts themselves. So this is the village of Duxbury over here. It's kind of cut off at the announcer there at the top. But this is the village of Duxbury here, outlined in yellow. This is the area that we've designated for this purpose over the village of Duxbury. Now, it's important to note, this is not all of the land that the village of Duxbury owns. They own all of this that you see in the yellow, but then they also own all of that greenfield space that you see kind of right up in that area there. We chose not to include that because A, we didn't need it, and two, that would significantly increase the possibility that there would be new development somewhere on this particular site. So we restricted it to the greatest extent that we could, just to the areas that are already densely developed at the village of Duxbury. I'll talk about density in just a second. This is this over here. This is the village of Duxbury. Excuse me. This is the Island Creek development right here. So it includes the Island Creek itself, but then it also includes some of this land over here. This is the Baptist church that's right next to Route 3. And then this is a parking lot and some green space that they have right abutting Tremont Street. And then they have some other parking out in back, and then some undeveloped space in back here. As I understand it, they have there's a part of the waste treatment facility for the church, and then also for Island Creek is located back there as well. So there's limited possibility that they would be able to develop that. The numbers that you see here, you can see that 20.65 over on the village map there, and the 29.47, those are the acreages for each of these areas that's outlined in the yellow. And when you add that up, that comes to 50.1 acres. We ended zone 50, we did 50.1, minimal we could. And as tightly around these areas as we could make it. So these are the areas that we chose for this purpose. These are the most densely developed sites that we could have chosen. Yes, go ahead.
So I do have a question about the church that's not included in that?
The church structure itself, correct, is not included in this.
Is not, but they do own some land. Is the land included in that?
Yes. So,
Okay,
so the church owns this right here, which
Yeah.
is, we're not including in the sub-district. But they own, well, you can't really, you can kind of see it. There's a white line coming up here. So they own this right here,
Yeah.
and then they own this back here as well.
Okay, so I just read in today's Clipper that they were asked and they're not interested in, they would never be interested in selling their land. So would that still make this overlay qualify if that land cannot be sold?
This really doesn't have anything to do with the ownership of the land or who owns it.
Okay.
It's really just providing an overlay or imposing an overlay on a particular
But if that
area.
overlay doesn't include land that would qualify, that's what I don't understand. So it's an overlay, but it has to include potential area that could be built. And if the church is not going to sell it, then that land wouldn't be included for that potentially area being able to be built. Is that correct?
Well, it's conceivable that the owners of the church administration, I guess, they've said, yeah, they're not going to sell any of their land. That's they can certainly do with it whatever they would like.
So say you took that out, would it still, that overlay, would that still be enough?
Oh, yeah, that's good. So the answer there is no. So if we were to take this land out here and this land out here, it'd be less than this 2947, and that would take us under, with the two areas combined, that would take us under the 50 minimum that we would need to be included.
And would the state ask questions about that, or would that make any difference as far as their decision?
No. We've submitted, and I'll touch on this also. What we did is we submitted the maps that we have here and the bylaw to the state, and they agreed to do, as they've done for all communities that elected to do this, they do like a preliminary review of the bylaw and the maps that we've prepared and included in the warrant. And we did just get some feedback from them on Monday, and they didn't address, they've seen the maps, they've looked at it, they did not address, or they did not indicate that any of these areas would be a concern from the perspective that you're talking about. There are some issues on there that we do need to address. They're technical issues primarily in nature that we'll need to figure out how we want to address those, either prior to or at special town meeting. That's one of the things that we're going to be talking about tomorrow night in our working group meeting, because that's something, again, that just came out 2 days ago.
Steve, can I jump in just for a
yes,
second?
please.
And thank you for that question. That's a really important point, especially where it just came out in the paper today. This goes back to my comments earlier about what the town's obligated to do. We just have to designate areas that could potentially be developed. We can't force any owners to build or not build. And owners, whether it be the church today or another organization in 50 years, it's their private property, and so they're entitled to not take advantage of the zoning if they don't want to. If they like it the way it is, that's the way it'll stay.
Thank you.
Does that answer the question?
Yes.
Okay, thanks for bringing that up.
So again, why did we propose these areas where where multifamily housing already exists? So I've kind of touched on this before. Again, it's a little cut off at the top there. Other towns have actually done this, something similar. Hingham and Braintree have done this. They've actually put their overlays on areas that already have a dense development. The town of Braintree, they overlaid the Grossman's Plaza, where the convention is, and they have the retail there. They put their overlay, at least in part, on that area there. Hingham overlaid some existing dense multifamily that they have in town. Braintree has already had their plan approved, so they're fully compliant at this stage. Hingham's passed their plan, And,
Sorry,
Oh, that's
I was
okay.
trying to get the thing off
oh,
the
yeah,
top there.
okay. So, Hingham passed their plan as a town, and they've submitted it to the state, but the state hasn't fully signed off on it yet. They're still in the process of reviewing it. But point there is, this is something that the state permits, allows us to do. They argued that in court when Duxbury was, when we were arguing our case back earlier in May. The state acknowledged, yes, being able to overlay existing dense development is permissible under this law. So we're taking advantage of that. Why? Because that, again, minimizes the possibility. And if it does happen, the extent to which new units could be developed.
How does that, though, solve the problem that the state has about existing housing? It really, it's supposed to be new as compared to existing. So how does that answer the state's demand that we need more housing?
Well, that's a great question. You can kind of look at this, one way to answer that is to look at the two approaches that we've taken as the town of Duxbury last fall versus this, versus this spring. Last fall, we put a plan in place, for people to vote on that, had a pretty strong likelihood that something would have been developed in the near term. The message that we heard was a resounding no. We do not want that. And so the plan that we have here, really minimizes that to the greatest extent possible. But your question, the answer is, it really doesn't do very much to.
Yeah, I'm not complaining or faulting what you're doing. I'm just saying the basics of what the state's asking the town.
Yeah.
If you already have multifamily units in those areas, when 750 new units won't fit. So how is that answering the state's request? I mean, there seems to be a disbarment there. I also have an issue where this is like letting the genie out of the bottle. Because as the state fights us to say you have to do this, it's the law. People who own more than 1 acre of land, let's say 5 or 6, which some of my neighbors do, even though it's not in the bylaws, they will then go to the state and file a suit to build more housing there, which you've already allowed it here. And you're going to discriminate against them for not doing it. And you won't be able to fight that back. You'll be in court over time.
So I guess one of the issues that one of the requirements of the law is that any of the areas that, can I go back? Yeah. Any of the areas that we'd be putting the overlay on, it has to be a minimum of 5 acres. So if someone has a 1 acre lot, why don't you include my 1 acre lot in this? The reason is because, again, anything that we would include, whether it's 2 or it's 3, 5, whatever, any one of them would have to be at least 5 acres. So anything less than 5 would automatically be ineligible for this purpose.
I think that's going to happen. That's what I'm saying. Anybody, that's why I mentioned 5 acres. Anybody that has over 5 acres only in Duxbury, I think will challenge to build multifamily housing and take advantage, basically riding the coattails of this.
Well, that already exists. It's existed since the 1960s. It's Chapter 40B. It's the Affordable Housing Law that allows developers basically to just go to the zoning board and get what's called a comprehensive permit.
Right.
And sidestep actually a lot of the things that we're able to control.
Control here.
Yeah.
This kind of like paves the way a little bit more for them to do that.
Maybe. I mean, we're fighting this battle right now, but I hear you. Yep, I hear you.
I'm saying there's a hidden danger to it that we haven't.
Yes, so again, I think we've touched on a number of these things. It's logistically difficult to add units here, and it would be expensive. The village of Duxbury, sorry, kind of jumping around here. So the density that we had to zone for these 2 areas, or any areas that we would designate, they would have to be zoned as part of the overlay at a density of 15 units per acre. Not individually, but as an average. They'd have to be zoned to 15 units per acre. What we did at the village here, at the village site right now, this area that you see in yellow, this is currently developed to a density of about 12 units per acre. In the bylaw, we specified that this particular subdistrict, the MCOD Kingstown, the overlay specifies that it be zoned at 12 units per acre. So the idea there is that there's really no opportunity here to develop additional units than those that are already there at the village. At Island Creek here, so in order to get to the 15 average, we had to make the density here for this sub-district, we had to make that 19. So there's 320 units right now at Island Creek, and so that comes out to, again, based on this area in yellow, that's also roughly about 12 units per acre. So there's that differential. We're zoning, the overlay specifies 19, the existing is 12. So yes, there is some opportunity to add some new units under this particular bylaw at Island Creek. But again, these are the two densest areas in town that we have, developed with existing multifamily housing. So if we were looking to minimize the possibility that there was going to be development, this is really the best we can do. Yes?
Is that a minimum or a maximum?
The 15?
Yeah.
The answer is, it's both. For the state, 15 units per acre is the minimum that we had to zone to.
What can you go up to?
For us, you can go up to whatever you want. But we specified that 15 is a maximum. Actually, we're actually zoning to, it actually comes out to about 16 units per acre here, because that's what had to get us to the 750. In this case, we're actually doing it 787 units. The state recommends strongly that we include a buffer above the 750 of 10%. We said we don't want 10%, we're going to do a buffer of 5%. So 787 is roughly a 5% buffer over the 750. So again, we specified this is 50.1 acres, and 16 units per acre gets us to the 787.
And nothing to be built on top of that?
I'm sorry?
So that's the limit that can be built in those two zones?
But by right, yes, that's the limit that you could
By
build.
right.
Yes.
So even if the church sold their property, it could not be developed?
Not saying that it couldn't be developed. It certainly could be developed. But because again, the Island Creek location can tolerate additional density there.
Okay,
So
so it can be built.
there's a possibility that it could be, yes. But again, we can't get to zero. There is no way outside of the law being overturned or outside of a judicial action that would exempt us from the law. There is absolutely no way for Duxbury to get to zero there. We cannot promise zero. That is physically impossible.
What do you expect to be built there?
I'm sorry?
If it's passed, what do you expect to be built there?
Your guess is as good as mine.
Well, not really. You've been doing this longer, and you know what developers will do.
I don't know what developers will do. I really don't. The thing with Island Creek too is that when you look at it, I don't know a great deal about this, but as I understand it, there's a number of different entities that own all these buildings. There are some complex ground leases that are associated with those, and again, waste treatment is something that they're concerned about. They're already at capacity right now at Island Creek, so if they were to add new units, they would have to add additional capacity to their waste treatment facilities there. I don't know where they would put that. I don't know. It would probably be prohibitively expensive. I don't know. Again, I'm not a developer, so I don't know.
Was there a study done on that? See what it costs?
No, we did not do it. That is well beyond the scope of what we're trying to accomplish here. But the point that I'm making is, there would be a tremendous number of complexities that they'd have to go through in order to add new units here. Is it impossible? No, it's not impossible. It's certainly possible that they could do it. But if we're trying to make this difficult to add new units in Duxbury, it's about as difficult as we can make it. So.
Significantly more difficult than what Bonji's would have been.
But by far more difficult than what Bonji's would have designed. Absolutely. Let's talk about that. So again, what's our plan for compliance? So, we created a zoning plan here that would comply with the MBTA Communities Act in case our lawsuit fails. Once again, the state came back. We have some tweaks that we need to make. We'll be talking about those in particular tomorrow night and leading up to town meeting. But that's the plan that we have. Zoning properties where development of new housing would be difficult or unlikely. We want to maintain eligibility for the grants and the state money to avoid enforcement action, without creating with minimizing the possibility that there would be new housing. And again, Brian touched on this, if the law becomes invalid, we could respond by repealing the bylaw amendment, if we approve that. If the law is invalidated, and we have the opportunity to do that. So we do have that as an option, potentially in the future. So what's next? Well, information sessions, here we are. This is the last one. And then we have, special town meeting on June 16th at 7 o'clock at the PAC. If you're coming to vote, please come early. The town of Dracut, they just voted on theirs. They rejected it on Monday. They had people lined up down the street to get in. Their special town meeting started an hour and a half late because people were still checking in. I don't want to be starting this meeting at 8:30 on June 16th, so please come early and sign in. Yes, go ahead.
Once the town approves or whatever with this at the special town meeting, because there's grants in question, how long does the state have to make a decision on whether they accept this or not, if we approve it?
Yep, that's a good question. I don't think that there's a limit. That there's a time. In other words, is the state obligated to, give us a decision within 60 days or 90 days or 100 days? I don't believe that there's a limit there.
So what happens to those grants?
So as long as, that's a very good question. So right now, and it's important to kind of talk about the situation that we're in right now, and then the situation that we'd be in after June 16th. So right now, we're in the status of what's called interim compliance. So what we had to do is back in February, we had, Valentine's Day. By that date, we had to submit basically an action plan. That basically what it boils down to is it was a statement of intent that we were going to, come up with a plan to comply with the law. That's basically what that was. As long as we submitted that to the state and it was acceptable, the state considered us to be in interim compliance. I think for the town of Marshfield, they had to do the same thing because they didn't pass this last year. They also had to submit an action plan by February 14th this year. They said, no, we're not going to do that. So they did not file that action plan on February 14th. So as of February 15th, then, they were out of compliance. So they are, Marshfield is now non-compliant. But we are in a state of, as I say, interim compliance because
And that keeps us in compliance.
we've met our obligations as they exist to this date. Right. But then we get to June 16th. If we were to pass this and then submit it to the state for their final review and approval, we would still be considered to be in a state of interim compliance at that stage because the state wouldn't have rejected it. We would have fulfilled our obligation to pass something and submit it to the state. We would be in interim compliance, pending any decision that the state would make on what we submit.
Two questions. One is, if that lawsuit does go through, the unfunded mandate,
Yep.
and we've already passed this, there's been questions about, okay, well, you've already passed it, now they say it's unfunded. We'll fund the towns that haven't passed it. The ones that already passed it don't receive those funds? I heard that, I'm not sure if it's true or not. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure about the legalities of that. I don't know that, it would really be up to the select board if we pass it, whether we would, whether we would drop the lawsuit or continue to pursue it.
Not even drop the lawsuit. If we passed it and the lawsuit was successful, it would work for other towns, but because we've already passed it, we passed it before why it was unfunded.
Well,
So now we consider we don't get those funds. There's an argument there that I've heard legally.
Well, can I just add that? I'm not familiar with that argument, but if we passed it and then we were successful with the lawsuit, what we're asking for in the lawsuit is exemption from compliance. So we could then just not comply. In other words, we could go ahead and repeal it. So the unfunded piece wouldn't even come into it because we'd undo what we just did. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Well, again, I go back to once it's passed, their grandfather, people will follow. We all know that's gonna happen. But the other question I have is, the grants that we're talking about, that we apply for, what do we actually get? We apply for, 3 million grants. What do we actually see? You apply, you don't get them all. So, I'd love to hear, we've got 3 million applications out there. Well, on a typical year, how much do we actually get for what we applied for?
Good question. And that I think that's probably another question for our finance director. She's got a finger on the grants platform and those that we receive on a regular basis. I think, as I mentioned, we look back 2 years to 23 and 24. We got about $2 million worth of grants that would be exposed.
And what did we apply for back then?
I don't know what we applied for. So yeah, I don't know quite what all that story. Suffice it to say, there's a strong possibility that we wouldn't have gotten $2 million in grants.
And some of those that we grants, a lot of those can be health and safety, which they can't do.
I guess that's a good question. The state they've done nothing but increase the number of grants that are exposed to non-compliance. So it's entirely possible that they could.
Can they enforce it?
Well, again, the law is enforceable, and if the regulations are valid, and the regulations include those grants, they would be able to enforce that. Other questions? Yes?
Yeah. You mentioned how there was a 9-to-1 vote, speaking how people were against this new housing.
Yes.
Do you feel this was like an underrepresentation? I'm not sure the exact number of people who voted for that. So what do you think?
So last fall, it was roughly, I don't remember what the number is, roughly 900 people voted.
900?
A little over 900, yeah. The Clipper, of course, documents this meticulously, so you can take a look there. Round numbers, we'll just say 900, and as Brian mentioned, it's about 10 to 1 against the proposal that we had. But the key thing to remember there too is that was a different time. That was before that Milton versus the Commonwealth lawsuit before the SJC had been decided. So there was some question about whether cities and towns were obligated to comply back then. So that certainly may have factored into voters' decision about how to vote on the proposal that we had before them last November. Different situation right now. The law is valid, it's constitutional, and it's enforceable. So as Brian mentioned earlier, compliance is not optional. This is something that the state is requiring us to do. It's something that they have the ability to enforce and impose upon us if we don't do it ourselves.
And the Bonji site is no longer an issue.
And yes, and that was another key piece of it is that the Bonji site, there's really not a whole lot there. That would have been a lot easier to add new units to if we had put the overlay on that site versus either one of the two that we talked about here.
If everything proceeds and the lawsuit wins and we go ahead and pass this, and then the lawsuit wins after the fact, we need another special town meeting to repeal the bylaw that this enacts?
Either an annual or a special, yeah.
One or the other, but it's not a selectman win thing that we just.
It's not just that, we don't just vote.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's the same, you'd have to repeal it the same way you passed it.
Yes, it is.
Although I think if we do repeal it, we only need 50% to pass it. I think we need 2/3 to repeal it.
Okay, good point.
So, yeah.
Yes. Brian actually just raised a really good point. Prior to the passage of this particular law, if we were going to be making a change to our zoning bylaw in Duxbury or anywhere, those typically need to pass by a 2/3 majority. As part of the MBTA communities law, any zoning amendments or any zoning proposals that towns and cities would be adopting, if they are related to housing, increasing the supply of housing or permitting additional housing to be built in the community, those proposals only need to pass by a simple majority. That's why what we'll be voting on June 16th, that only has to pass by a simple majority as opposed to 2/3. But as Brian just mentioned, it doesn't work the other way around. If we were going to rescind it, if we're going to revoke this, that's not adding housing, we would be revoking permission for additional housing. That would have to pass by 2/3.
Well, I wanted to thank you guys for doing this and spending your time on Thursday. We appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, we do. I mean, it's a lot of work. Any chance that you can keep this zoning committee going and look into senior housing and see where we can, like, Bonnie gave the example of senior housing? That is an issue and this won't affect that. But we do need affordable housing, and especially like you mentioned, for seniors. Is there a way that this group could migrate into that?
Very good question. As a working group, our charter, or the charge that we've been given by the select board, that expires on June 30th. So So as of right now, that's the situation that we're in. We'll have to see what kind of situation we're in on June 17th. But to your question, with regard to looking at opportunities for development of additional, multifamily, independent of all of this, for example, doing it the way that we really would like to do it, that would be up to the select board if they wanted to appoint, reappoint this group or another group to do that sort of thing. They certainly would have the ability to do that. But what you're proposing, that's also part of my job. I'm on the select board. My goodness gracious. I'm on the planning board, yes. Holy smokes, fine, you're kicking out. I'm a member of the planning board, so that's part of my job, is to look and think about those sorts of things more broadly for the town. So that's something that you should be asking me to do, as well as my colleagues on the planning board. That's certainly something that we can and should be looking at.
And I think it is one of your goals, right? I think
yes.
You stated, yeah. And that's an excellent question, because I know we've been talking only about MBTA communities, and what could happen and the valid concerns that people have. But there's the reality of the fact that we need additional housing for folks who want to stay in town. And to Steve's point, not only is the planning board taking this up, but the select board is looking into this as well, saying, there are some people who say, well, let's keep it as close to when Miles Standish was here as possible, which is fine. There's lots of things we need to preserve in town. So there's naturally there should be concern and moving slowly when we're talking about changes in town. But one of the things that came up in the override vote this past March is maybe we should have more diversity in terms of what our zoning looks like generally. Should we have more commercial? Should we change the way things are designed? There's lots of sort of big picture questions, and one of the things that ties directly into, in my view, is how do we create more diversity of housing, going back to the comprehensive plan I mentioned at the beginning, that'll allow folks to stay here. And do we do, just for example, do we do more retail on the first floor, for example, to allow second and third floors to be condos or apartments? There's a need for that potentially. So those things are being looked at, just not with the laser intensity that we're looking at this, only because we have a deadline here. With planning board and select board, it's something that we're definitely looking, not long term, because it's a need now, but it's something that we're, I think, more conscious of in terms of needing to address in the near future.
Isn't that what Livable Duxbury is working on?
Well, that's an excellent point. Yes, thank you for raising that. Yeah, out of the senior center.
There's a group that's researching all of that.
Yes, absolutely, and thank you very much for raising that. Out of the senior center, there's a group called Livable Duxbury, formerly known as Asian Dementia Friendly. It's about 60 volunteers who are putting together ideas. It's one of the auspices of guidance from the AARP. There are multiple communities that are looking into this. And in fact, Duxbury just joined with our regional planning agency, Old Colony Planning Council, that's putting together multiple communities in Plymouth County to try to come up with some ideas and some thoughts as to how to address the housing need. But thank you for reminding me, that we already have a group that's looking at specifically for livable Duxbury, particularly for folks who are older. Thank you.
A lot of this is also captured in the comprehensive plan that was done in 2019.
Right.
So rolling it back to this group, if they roll it back to them, they may be able to cherry pick some points out of that as well.
For sure. There is good coming out of this because it's forcing us to look at some things very, very carefully.
We have a participant who's joined us on the call here too. Just wanted to make sure, I didn't see a hand up, but just wanted to make sure that we offer that individual an opportunity to chime in if that person wanted to. Great. Thank you, Ted. Other questions, folks? Oh, yes, go ahead.
Yes, you just talked about this affordable housing and whatnot, and also mentioned problems with the budget and the override. Hypothetically speaking, if this middle or multifamily housing was built, would this help with any issues with the override, with more like tax income coming in?
Great question. Yes. Did you want to jump in?
Go right ahead.
Okay, sure. Actually, a few angles I want to approach that from. So I won't get to your question directly to start, but I will come back to it. The important thing to remember is in the bylaw that we're proposing here, and that we're looking to, that people are going to be voting on, we would require that any new units that would be developed under this particular overlay, 10% of those units would have to be affordable. And they would have to be affordable to residents or to households that are earning 80% or less of area median income. So that's how you define affordable, at least in this context. So 10% of those units would have to be affordable at that level. Now, we've also written into the bylaw that in the event that we're able to produce what's called a feasibility study that would demonstrate that any units that would be developed, it would be economically feasible to increase that affordability threshold, that affordability requirement, above 10%, anywhere between 10 and 20%. If a feasibility study showed that we could increase it above 10%, the bylaw automatically would impose a higher threshold than 10%, up to whatever the feasibility study would designate it, say it's possible. And the reason we did that is really, the primary reason is because town of Duxbury can have what's referred to as subsidized housing inventory, an SHI. And right now, our subsidized housing inventory is roughly about 7.5%. As houses are added and things like that, that's always moving, but roughly it's about 7.5%. If new units would get developed and none of them were affordable, what that does is that builds that denominator of that SHI percentage, and our SHI would go down. The 10% is kind of the magic threshold for our subsidized housing inventory. If our subsidized housing inventory is 10% or above, that allows us to avoid having developments proposed under Section 40B, these 40B developments. We could avoid those developments in our town if we're above 10%. But we're not. If 10% of any new units that are developed are affordable, that at least allows us to tread water with with our current SHI. And if it's above 10%, then that would allow us to increase our subsidized housing inventory and get to that magic nirvana of 10% that would allow us to avoid 40B developments.
How many units are we away from the 10% right now?
Oh, I wish I knew. I don't know what the number is.
It's a bunch.
Yeah.
One development won't get us
Never
there.
hit with the way we're developing now at 10%. So
Yeah, it's a tough place to get to.
Yeah.
Can you mention also the local preference?
Oh, thank you. Yes. So again, the bylaw has the bylaw. The bylaw reads like a romance novel about patent applications. So, but in the bylaw, one of the things that we included as well is we included what's referred to as a local preference. And what that means is that if there are any affordable units that are developed here, that the preference for those units, what would happen is when those units are developed and they come online, there would be a lottery, because there's going to be a lot of demand for those affordable units. There's a lottery that people can apply to and then possibly be selected for to occupy those units. What we've built into the bylaws, we've built in a local preference that would give preference in that lottery to existing residents of Duxbury, municipal employees here in Duxbury, so that's fire, police, school, teachers, yes. They would get preference for those affordable units if units are going to be developed. So that's something that we thought, if we're going to be putting up with this and we're going to be doing this in town, the town residents deserve that. So, and that's something that's legal for us to do. The state has not come back and said that that's something that we can't do. So again, if we pass this, we'll have that local preference in there for the affordable units that get developed, if they do get developed. Yeah.
Good question, Henry. Thank you.
Yes. Oh, but then I owe you a response here. Then your question was about the override and what this what this could possibly do with regard to additional tax revenue. So if there were additional units that would be developed, then yes, it's certainly we would certainly expect that additional tax revenue would be would come from that. But once again, it's ambiguous exactly what would happen here, because we don't have a fiscal impact study that would show us, or provide a good estimate of what would happen in different scenarios. So we would probably, yes, get some additional tax revenue, but then there would probably also be some additional costs that would be associated with this. We would expect some, not very many, but there would probably be some additional students who would be attending the schools that could add some cost. There would be, additional needs for, fire and police service potentially at these places as well. That could add to costs, and there are other costs that could be included as well. So, we don't know exactly what the number would be. Again, there's too many variables here for us really to understand that very well. We don't know if any units would be developed at all, and if units were going to be developed, how many would be developed, all that sort of thing. It's really difficult to know that, but those are kind of the two scenarios that you have, or two opposing forces. Additional tax revenue from the additional units being developed, but there would be additional service costs from that the town would have to absorb as part of those units being developed. Again, if they were developed.
Would that be like something that the town would look into, looking more into that and seeing if having more of this middle housing would be more of a positive with more income, seeing exactly if the income would outweigh the costs of having this housing?
That's certainly something we'd want to understand. And if a proposal came before us, we would certainly want to, we would certainly want to have an understanding of that. But again, without something specific, it's very difficult for us to know, what the net impact would be with regard to revenue versus cost.
Sure.
You say affordable 10% of MBTA. Is that rental or ownership?
Well, it's not restricted to rental units. These could also be condominiums that could be developed under this bylaw.
This could all be just rental property.
It could all be rental, yep. Or it could be a mix. There could be multifamily, multifamily rental. There could be condominiums as well.
But it could, if a developer wanted to, and most of that property is already owned by different companies, they could just add rental. So it really wouldn't affect the homeownership or low income homeownership or anything in the sense. It would just be rental. And probably will be, right?
Again, I can't predict what would be built if anything were to be built.
Did you see, like in other towns that have already passed it and they've started building, what has been built?
I don't know a whole lot about what's been built. I do know in Lexington, I know they've passed this, and I think a lot of what's been permitted there under their MBTA community zoning bylaw or under their map. A lot of that is rental. I don't think that they have a whole lot of ownership there, but that's my memory going back almost a year. So that's my memory, and that's me not knowing the full details there. But that's my recollection is that in that situation, I think a lot of it was rental that was being developed.
And I think Lexington affirmatively wanted this zoning as well.
And there was more of a groundswell, exactly, a lot more support for this type of thing in that town.
I just want to say,
Oh, yes.
a great job with the overlays, what's being proposed to the state and for the town meeting, so I think that's a really good option and something that would be good that you're doing. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Brian's been working really hard on this. Tag, who we heard from earlier, Tag knows more about this stuff than all of the rest of us combined. Tag has been absolutely tireless on this. The entire town owes Tag a debt of gratitude for the work that he's done. So, yes.
Just briefly, if I may, just a word of thanks to all of you for coming out this afternoon. We sincerely appreciate the coverage that the Clipper has provided throughout this, and we sincerely thank the local scene for covering us live and in color today to get the message out to you. Thank you all.
Yes. Very grateful. Thank you very much for coming out. Please come on the 16th. Please come early. Tell family, tell friends, bring them all. We look forward to seeing you. Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yes, hey, Ted.
Yeah, actually, I have a question.
There are pieces of information about
No, this,
Sure.
They were